And I was always going to go to med school. That was kind of my plan. I cannot say enough good things about living in Edinburgh. So it's in like the countryside of Scotland. I think we did something like 30 new beers in 15 months or something like that. I said, yeah, let's do it. It was me saying, let's join the dark side. I joined in 2017 at High West. That's like, I knew you were going to ask that question. It's like choosing your favorite child. And so we're now just on the precipice of this next phase of High West and that we can contribute to the American whiskey landscape, hopefully.
What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Small Lake City Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Nilsson, and today's guest, we have the head of distilling for what I would say is one of the best distilleries in Utah, and was really one of the first to really put the liquor and spirit beverage on the map, both nationally and internationally. Now, the organization itself is High West. If you've ever been to the One Ship Distillery to have brunch or do a tasting, or you've been to the restaurant near Main Street in Park City, you know how quality of the product is that they have and how much credit and recognition it's gotten as well. But the person in charge of distilling is a man by the name of Isaac Winter. Now, Isaac's story starts long before High West and includes a lot of the familiar faces that we see along the brewery, beer, and other distilleries around Salt Lake. People that we've had on the podcast like Kevin Templin, but he also has worked at a lot of other places that ring a bell like Red Rock Brewing, Uinta Brewing, as well as took him across the pond to go get his master's degree in Scotland. But great story from someone who's done a ton to put Salt Lake further on the map, who is a master in his field and a lot to learn from in my conversation with him. So enjoy. Yeah, this has been a whole new world that I've been self-exposed to. Because people are like, oh, so what did you do before that you learned how to do all this? I'm like, this is how I learned how to do all of this. There was no other process or learning, or it's actually one thing I've been thinking a lot about is there's this sentiment around people who, let's call it Gen X and above, boomers, et cetera, that can't teach an old dog new tricks. I've learned what I've learned, set in the ways, thank you, whatever. And with millennials, there's kind of this lingering feeling of that, but people don't realize how easy it is in today's world to get to at least competent in most things.
YouTube.
Exactly.
Immediately. Like
the amount of YouTube I spent, I'm like, oh, how do we record video? How do we record audio? How do we put these together? How do we launch a podcast? How do we grow? Like all of these little skills that I've had to learn to go from copy paste into Google to YouTube and learn. And so like the amount of things that you can just get from, I have no idea how to do this, to competent is way less than you'd think.
Oh,
Granted,
absolutely.
To get to like mastery, that's another
10,000 hours.
There you go. Bingo, you passed the test. My guy, Malcolm Gladwell. And so it's fun to see how like I've learned so much, and now it's like almost just like this muscle memory of like, okay, cool, set this up, do this, make sure these levels are this, record that, edit this, and this will make life easier in the future. This will make life, anyway, all that stuff.
But, cheers for jumping in, getting after it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. It's a very different process when there's like an internal motivation towards it instead of someone telling you what to do. And like that, like I've never worked harder on something, but it's never been nearly as rewarding.
Oh, absolutely. It's like your baby, right? You're like ushering this through its birth and emergence.
Yeah, I think like somewhere in like the toddler phase, it's excited to be like, this area is so cool. Like I'm a sucker for a good space, and like I will always go to a restaurant and be like, oh, cool, like the food has to be good, but
table stakes. If
we're in a cool place as well, like everybody wins. Bingo, I'm here for it. And so being in the library up in High West, I look at all these bottles and seeing how many I've tasted, haven't tasted, so much history that, I'm sure it's, amazing for you to look at this wall and be like, oh, wow, like, look at all that I've done over the years.
Absolutely. So for everybody tuning in, we're in the High West Library. This is a brand new space for us at the One Ship Distillery outside of Park City. And we've got a big bottle wall to the side of us that kind of, goes over some of our favorite releases. We've got High Country Single Malt, Bottled and Bond, Midwinter Night's Dram, all the way back to OMG Rye and Vodka 7000. Just like a little trip down memory lane.
Yeah. It's also your own like personal journal, probably some good memories, some bad memories.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A little hodgepodge of it all.
We have fond whiskeys or whiskeys that we're really fond of and ones that were really, really hard fought, but we're proud of every single one of them.
And it's interesting too, because like, and this is my own ignorance in it, but sitting down with like Kevin and Britt and talking about, TF and brewing, because they're primarily a lager joint, but then have had, huge success with like Ferda and some of their other hallmark beers, but still make, their craft beers. If you follow their Instagram, there's at least, I feel like one a week.
And now wine.
I just saw on their Instagram that they just had so many tons of grapes delivered to get that process kicked off again, which is amazing that they are tackling that beast. And like similar to kind of we were talking about like going from beer to whiskey, but also going from like beer to wine, which I feel like, I don't know, again, my own ignorance would be a very different route, but again, I think, very ignorant.
It's interesting. So with moving this is I guess I'm ignorant also, but from an outsider's perspective with beer, you want everything to be so incredibly sterile all the time. Things never touch the ground. You use isopropyl alcohol on everything, making all your connections. With natural wines, you want just the right amount of funk. That's something we see in whiskey too. But, it's like looking at the Instagram of Templin Family Wines the other day. It's like they're in, their shed, open air, crushing grapes. And they want all of those microbes on the grape skin, on the stems falling in from the air to give that character and that sense of place to their wine. I'm stoked to see how it turns out.
Yeah, I expect nothing but greatness from it because they are who they are, and that's their reputation now, whether they like it or not. Totally. But I've always been. So my cousin, he lives in Willamette Valley outside of Oregon, wine country, Pinot country, Chard country.
Beautiful.
And it wasn't really until I visited him there, and because he's a chef, and who buys all of his wine from there for his restaurant as well. And so we walk in, and it's like, red carpet gets rolled out. Everybody knows him by name, and they're pulling out the reserve bottles.
Awesome.
And it's so fun to go to, I'm trying to think which one it was. I can't remember right now, but it's interesting to have, you can be at a location, be like, hey, this is the Western facing vines. These are the East facing vines, same grapes, same everything, but tell the difference in the soil and the sun, and really being able to compare and contrast all of these little minute differences. Because to your point of beer making, you want everything to be sterile. You want to be able to control all of the variables that you have, invite no sort of variance that could come into the process. And with that, it's interesting to be like, okay, here's all of the normal. Let's change this variable. Let's change this variable. Let's change this variable.
You kind of have sister products at that point. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And then you go through and taste it. And it's like this moment you're like, oh, I get it. Like I see what they mean, and a whole process behind it all. And so I again, like with TF and understanding and talking to Kevin, where it's like, oh, well, this is why it's easier to pop out an IPA in 2 weeks compared to like a lager or a Pilsner that's going to take a lot more time. And I'm sure, like to your point of saying, here's ones that went really well. Here's where some hard fought battles and learnings. I'm sure it's an emotional roller coaster to say the least.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So, something that I miss about the beer life cycle, we'll say, is the R&D timeline is so much different. So with an IPA, you're maybe grain to glass in, I don't know, like 15 days or something like that, or 18 days. Lager beers, if you're doing it right, you're maybe 4 weeks or 5 weeks, 6 weeks if you have a long lager rest. But with whiskey, you're in like the year time frame, the years time frame, and so you have to do your best to choose the right ingredients, to choose the right yeast, to craft your distillation protocol and choose a barrel that's going to benefit the distillate and get you to where you want to go. But then you have to cross your fingers and say, I'll see you in 4 years. Yeah. We'll see how it turns out. And, I look at on our wall over here, we've got Bottled and Bond rye from High West, which is a new release for us. We're in the second iteration, but all of a sudden, we now have so much whiskey that we're able to play with that's kind of come of age. And so it's thinking back on those moments in 2018, who was running the still, what protocols were we doing, why did we choose those barrels, and seeing all of those things come forward when we're in the blending lab, looking at each one of those lots that we're going to put together, that gives you that really intimate snapshot of that time period for 6 months in 2018. We're at a really fun time in High West life cycle now. And that long R&D timeline is now, starting to come to an end for some of those really fun projects. Yeah. And so I think that we'll have new things coming out over the next couple of years that I think our team's going to be really proud of, and that we can contribute to the American whiskey landscape, hopefully.
Perfect. And we don't have to go, we can stay in Utah to do so. We don't have to go to Kentucky or other places.
Right. And we shouldn't. No. We shouldn't. I mean, bourbon can be made anywhere in the U.S., right? And Kentucky bourbon has its place and has that appellation. But how can High West, other Utah distillers put their stamp on it and make it their own? I think that story is just starting to be told right now.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you think about kind of this juxtaposition we find ourselves in with Utah getting so much, so much flack about, they have terrible liquor laws. The people making the laws don't even drink.
Everywhere has weird liquor laws.
Right.
Everywhere.
And people forget that. But I've had enough of those weird ones other places where I'm like, I'll take what we can get. Like this, it could be a lot worse.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how, with all of this, these headwinds, these assumptions, the cultural part of Utah and Salt Lake in particular, but then at the same time, have all these outstanding products that are coming to market. Between all of the breweries, distilleries, now wineries, and seeing how we can still play head to head, even with all of these assumptions. I'm sure you have heard it both in your current role and previous roles of going to a place like, oh, you're from Utah? Can you guys even drink beer? Or how are you making beer?
Does that make sense even? Yeah. Yeah, I know. And, something that I come back to is, I think genius loves company. So when we start to see High West coming out with things, we're drawing on inspiration from TIA, from Uinta, from Sugar House Distilling, from, Beehive Distilling, all of these really great artisans in Utah. We can all, I think, lift each other's boats. And we can share ideas, and we can, come together to kind of craft that Utah stamp on the landscape.
And that's ironically where I was hoping you were going to go with that, because it's been interesting. Because I told you this week I released episode 52. Have 3 or 4 in the backlog right now. And it's interesting now where I have enough data points to start to make these connections between all these conversations and industries and backgrounds and priorities. And the one that comes to mind the most amongst everybody is community. Yeah. And we always joke about, the saying of Deseret in Utah and industry and community. And the LDS backgrounds that started a lot of that community that people, even if they leave that behind, still search for. And it's so collaborative. You see, in your experiences of being like, oh, hey, we all are inspired by each other. We all push each other to be better. If I had a question, there's probably 3 or 4 people I could call that could help me, that have gone through it, that would be willing to do so. Whereas other places, they might tell you to get lost. This is our process.
So
this
protective.
Is ours. Exactly. And I've seen that in tech. I've seen that in food. I've seen that in the art community. There is no place where there aren't people willing to help each other and collaborate and riff on how to make something better and push each other to be better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking back through my own career and the people who have helped me along the way and where they are now. And so I think, the we'll call it alcoholic beverage community in Utah is pretty small, and it's pretty incestuous. And so I think that there's some good to that, where I've got buddies or mentors or acquaintances at a lot of these places where I can call them or I can text them and say, hey, I've got this problem, or hey, what do you think about this idea, or how would you approach this, and get a really thoughtful answer. I think a great example of this is Kevin Templin. You had Kevin and Britt on the podcast before, and Kevin's been a long time mentor to me. He was the one who took a chance on me in, it was 2011, maybe 2010. I was this college kid. I had homebrewed a couple of times of a beer with my uncle in the backyard, but I had worked in a tissue engineering lab. That was kind of my background, and I knew that I didn't really want to work in a lab for the rest of my life. I wasn't going to go to med school. I had this chemistry degree, and what was I going to do with that? And I said, well, maybe I'll go work in a brewery. So I dropped my resume and got a phone call back, and showed up to my interview, and Kevin was there, and he's like, it's not just all like sitting back in your flip flops, talking about beers, drinking. This is hard work. It's cold. It's hot. It's long hours. You have to lift heavy stuff. This is the best job I've ever had. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I can get behind that. And I just never looked back. There's been such a great marriage of the art and science for me. I grew up loving cooking and flavor and being interested in being in the kitchen and how things come together. And when I started working at Red Rock and got exposed to fermentation science and how you can bridge those two things together, that was huge for me. It was like this big aha moment. And from that relationship, from that first job that I had, I met Brendan Coyle, who helped start High West, who's still a big part of my life today. Have retained a really strong relationship with Kevin and Britt, Eric Dunlap from Albatross Wines, Jaron Anderson from Helper Beer. All of these people all came out of that one snapshot in my life, and it's been super powerful and a great support system since.
And it's such a fun point when you can find it in, because everybody finds themselves in this like career trajectory, right? You go from this like ideation phase where you're like, okay, I'm doing this. I don't like this. I don't like where this would put me. Back to the drawing board. Well, here's an idea. Go meet with Kevin. And then all of a sudden you go from this ideation phase to like doing it and understanding and getting this validation. This is what I want to do, to where then you go into this like almost like core career development phase where you are learning, you are getting that hands-on experience in a very intimate and consistent way, to then get to the point where people are like, hey, like I want to start this distillery. I want to start this brewery. I want to start this winery. And you're like, yeah, like I can now help you do that.
Totally.
And if I can't, I know the people who can. And it's fun just to see that process laying, because in the perfect world, everybody understands what it was like to be in that ideation phase, kind of being lost. And like, it is sometimes frustrating because like you want to look and be like, just do like a little bit more work before. Like, I don't want to sit here and like start at ground zero with you, but I was there once and I can understand it. I will be patient with you.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to acknowledge that so much of your career, I'll speak for myself. My career has been luck and serendipity. It's like I was in the right place at the right time to land that job working with Kevin and Eric at Red Rock and learn, what I would consider the right way to do things. And through that job, I met Brendan Coyle, which led to my, later job and, existing role at High West. I had joined the Utah Brewers Guild while I was at Red Rock, and had met Kevin Ely from Uinta Brewing Company, and that led to my role at Uinta. And so it was just sort of these right place at the right times. And I think that your ability to capitalize on that when you're in that iterative phase is really important.
Totally. And like, there's so many people I've talked to, similar things. Like they would call it luck. I will always tell them it was hard work that paid off later. Like even with, I can't remember if it was Mark Bryan. Yeah, Brian Mark Taylor. I always say it backwards, but very famous artist in Utah, in the world. Landscape and still life, few people better in the country. But he eventually did some work for Brandon Sanderson. And that was because it was like 10 years before. They were at this thing before he was someone, and they remembered each other, and then fast forward to later. And so it's fun when you do put down the groundwork, be consistent about it, meet the right people, be in the right places, because you don't know that, 5-10 years later, Brendan's calling you being like, hey, we need a new distiller. Right. Are you interested? And you're like, it's all happening together.
Time to come to the dark side.
Exactly. Where a lot of people would look in and be like, wow, that's lucky. But you're like, well, yes, but no, but yes, but no. Isaac Winter, excited to sit down, talk about all things whiskey, distilling, brewing, alcoholic beverages. The director of distilling at High West, been here for, 8 years now. Very excited to talk about it because High West is something that has been such a staple in, I feel like, the whiskey community now. Because, as I told you when I was setting up, I remember living in Seattle, and every bar I would go to, I'd look at their whiskey and there would be a High West bottle there. And I remember the first time I was like so stoked. I was like, oh my gosh, Utah, here we go. And then after I was like, wait, this is more than just like the local place showing up where I go. And to see how much it's grown, how much it's developed. And I mean, looking at the wall of all of the history behind it, it's been a lot of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears that probably more than a handful have come from you. So excited to hear more, not only about your story, but the story of High West and how you've played a role in that.
Thanks for having me. This is great. I'm excited to be here.
No, likewise. But yeah, I mean, let's start from the beginning. I know you alluded to, growing up, you were making some beers with family and stuff, but I mean, what part of your childhood led towards, this dream that's come to be your now career?
So I've always really liked science, math and science. I was always good at. But I had a kind of, we'll call it like an elective class when I was in 7th grade. And I was able to go into the school's kitchen and learn how to make pizza. So I had this really charismatic instructor for, it was like one afternoon. And my family we were interested in food. I wouldn't say that back then we were foodies.
Got it.
We had a lot going on, and so we didn't focus on it necessarily. And so getting this hands-on class, like I can do this. Me, like 7th grader Isaac, I can do this by myself. It felt really empowering. And the guy who taught the class, I said it before, he's super charismatic. He brought a lot of like fun energy to it, and so it made it fun and interesting. So I think that was sort of my introduction to flavor and cooking, and how can you sort of make those things that you can share with everybody and put a smile on somebody's face. So I cooked all through college and really, really enjoyed that. I graduated from the University of Utah with a chemistry degree, and I was always going to go to med school. That was kind of my plan. My family's in medicine, or in like health law, or just some facet of medicine. So that was my career path. But I realized pretty quickly that I just didn't love homework enough to make that a reality, right?
You didn't want to sign up for like another 12 years of school?
No. And, we need people like that. But I was ready to go, and it just wasn't my path. So I'm sitting in this biostatistics course my senior year and just hating it, and had already had my graduation date scheduled. And I was like, you know what, I just can't do this. I need to change pace. So I emailed every brewer in the Salt Lake area and said, hey, like, I've been working in this tissue engineering lab. I can do cell counting. I can work in the lab. I'd love to get, a summer internship or something. And, I didn't hear back from anybody except for Red Rock. And they said, hey, come on down. We'd love to meet you. And so I walk in there. Kevin and Eric Dunlap are sitting there. I come in like with my Oxford shirt and, all like straight laced. And Kevin just looks at me. He's like, this isn't just sitting back, talking about beer and your flip flops. This is hard work. And I went for it. And so I started putting labels on bottles one by one by hand, and learning the ropes. So I would go after class, before class sometimes, and just tried to soak up everything that I could about brewing from Kevin, from all these guys who were working there at the time, and just fell in love. And so I, learned about cellaring beer, about filtration. Eventually they let me run the sticks, and I was, making my own beer, and just trying to get, every experience that I could. And about, we'll say like maybe 2012, this guy walks in. His name is Brendan Coyle, and he had worked at Red Rock a couple years before me, and everybody was like, "Oh yeah, he's working for High West now. He's big time." And he came in to do a collaboration beer with Kevin, and he and I totally hit it off. And I learned that he had done this master's degree in Scotland, where you live in Scotland for a year, you come out with a master's in brewing and distilling science. And I was all about that. And so we kept talking. I did a shadow day at High West. And I just thought, this is for me. But I needed to convince my parents that I wasn't running away to join the circus.
You're like, guys, listen, it's not just me trying to get an excuse to drink more beer.
Exactly.
But so during that internship, so you went from, at the beginning of the summer, sending a resume to so many people saying, I'm interested, to being at Red Rock with, now two people that are such foundational parts of the beer makers in Utah. At what point in that process were you like, oh, like this is it. This does validate kind of what I was looking for and what I do want to do?
I think two pieces. I wanted a career, and I saw Brendan at High West. I saw Kevin, as master brewer, and just realized that you could make a career out of this, and it could be fulfilling. It's something you could do forever, and it will take you all over the world. That's something that Kevin talked to me a lot about, is like, you can go to Singapore, you can go to Africa, you can go to, to New York City, wherever you want to go. If you have this skill, you can go wherever. So that kind of made it real for me. And then, I think the first time I brewed a batch of beer by myself on the commercial scale brewing system, at the end of the day, hanging up your work shirt and just feeling like you actually made something tangible, that was a huge moment for me. Working in the chemistry lab, you're working with these liquids and solids, and you can't really see what's going on, and what's going on in your head, but there's nothing you can really touch at the end of the day. And,
right.
And sometimes you're just working on the same problem over and over and over again. But with beer, you can, the iterative phase or the R&D phase can be so short that you can do all this development and end up with something that you're really proud of after a single shift sometimes. And that was powerful for me. I really, really enjoyed that feeling of making something tangible with my hands. I loved that.
It's crazy how that's such a detail that, if you were to tell yourself that, let's go back to 10, 12-year-old Isaac and say, hey, you're going to doing things with your hand. It's going to be part of your career of creation. You'd be like, whatever, we're going to be an astronaut or whatever it would be. Right. But then there's so many people, myself included, that get corporate jobs, go do whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, find themselves gravitating towards something that they can do to create. I've, in the past 2 years, started painting a lot. And that's been something that, mentally has done a lot of great things for me. And also the creative side has, but also just being able to say, I started with this, I did this, ended up with this. Especially in a way where you can, again, have this iteration process, especially with beer. It's so quick where, to your point of some whiskeys on the short end would be a year, but with beer, it could be a week or two where you go, oh, I can make 25 variations of this compared to one.
Absolutely.
And so to be able to say, okay, cool, I'd made this beer, the first one you ever did, be a little hoppy, a little bittery, I think we might need a little bit more foam, whatever that might be, and then do it, be oh, that did what I thought it was. And then people be oh, I do. And then to have someone else that you can put it in front of, they can enjoy, and you have this, not only just this R&D cycle, but this feedback cycle as well to show someone and see them taste it and enjoy it.
Right. And, there's something to be said for being an educator also. Taking your creation that you're super proud of and bringing that genuine passion to the table and then talking about it like this, that's huge too. And seeing somebody's eyes light up when they find it, maybe not quite as interesting as you, but they get where you're coming from. They see what you're trying to do. That is huge. Yeah.
And especially going to your parents' point of being well, what is he doing with this? Is he really done with college? Or because when you said that you were sitting in this class, this biostatistics class, being this is not it. I am not excited about it. I had similar, because when I went to college, it was architecture, civil engineering, pre-pharmacy, I have no idea, business, finance. Yeah. And I remember the time I told my mom I was not going to be going to pharmacy school, and that was no longer the plan. She was like, but are you sure? I don't know, business is vague. You don't know what to do. She's just always very thoughtful about kind of career trajectory, or doesn't want me to fall on my face. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine what her face would have been like if I told my very active Mormon mother that I was going to go brew beer. But there's a post or something I saw recently where it's even if you're doing something that your parents could look at and be maybe, if you show them that dedication, if you show that you're waking up early and doing the work and researching and essentially showing the grind or hustle towards it, whatever your dreams are, eventually they'll see it and be okay,
I get it.
I get it. You're not doing nothing. You have a craft. It might be different than what I would think or start with, but I trust you.
You hope so.
Yes.
Anyway, right? You hope so. Not everybody's quite that lucky, but yeah, I definitely was.
So, and part of that step was to go to Scotland, Edinburgh, to study all of this. I mean, tell me about that experience and all that you learned over there.
I cannot say enough good things about living in Edinburgh. So the program itself is at Heriot-Watt University, which is like maybe like 10 miles outside of the heart of Edinburgh. It's like a 35-minute bus ride, we'll say, but it's in like the countryside of Scotland. It's in, I think that if I remember right, the town is called Clermiston, I think. But you're driving out and you go through these like just flowing, wavy fields of barley. You turn around and the school is beautiful also, but it's the drive out there is fantastic. But I lived on campus. My then girlfriend and now wife and we hadn't been dating very long. So she lived in downtown Edinburgh. I lived outside. And so we do weekends with her and then, weekdays at my place.
What a trooper.
Oh,
to not even be with you, be like, absolutely. You go out there and have fun. I'll be here.
We'll see if we can make this work. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's a fantastic woman. Absolutely. The program itself is divided into four quarters, we'll say. So the first one is all about raw material production and use. So it's how do you make malted barley? You learn a little bit about like agave, a little bit about corn and stuff, but it's pretty focused on malt production for beer or for malt whiskey. And then you learn about like milling and conversion and all these things with raw materials. Then the second part is on brewing and hop chemistry, which I loved, filtration. The third piece is on distillation and maturation chemistry. And then the fourth piece is your master's project. And so this you're paired up with one of the professors. You do this project that's all summer long, and really dive deep into one aspect. And so at the time, from working at Red Rock, I knew that I really wanted to be in sour beer production. I love that, getting exposure to how we made Rev and Partabloom back in the day was really like transformational for me. It was just that next step of bringing the craftsmanship after you had done all of this, we'll say like after you've done all this science and numbers for creating the recipe. But at the end of the day, you're sort of like giving the secondary fermentation, this sour beer, fermentation process up to the brewing gods, right? You're just having faith that these little microbes are going to make something that's palatable. Yeah. And you're blending and you're creating something that's interesting. So like, that's what I wanted to do. So at the time I was paired up with this guy, David Quain, who literally wrote the textbook on yeast and brewing science. And I did my master's project on trying to model Brettanomyces fermentation speeds with Excel and like statistical models to see if you could improve the speed. So a big issue with brewing beers with Brettanomyces, which is a sour beer yeast, rather than Saccharomyces, which is normal brewer's yeast, is the fermentations can last really long, or they can go kind of haywire sometimes, or they ferment really, really dry, meaning there's no more residual sugar. But there's been some work done since this time. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of research out there into how to handle these yeasts. And so I was trying to show how you could use Excel to show this fermentation is on track or off track by modeling it. And it worked pretty good. It worked okay, I think, but I got exposure to it, like the whole scientific process. It was really, really great. But I guess about Edinburgh in particular, it wasn't bombed during World War II. And so everything was built in like the year 1200. Ugh. So, we'd be going out at night and we'd be walking down this really cool old the docile mountain wasps. Eric's getting molested by a wasp in the library here, everybody.
It's going to get real interesting real quick.
But yeah, so you'd be walking down this old alleyway that was built in the year 1200. You come around the corner and you happen upon this super cool, very modern cocktail bar. And so it's this really interesting juxtaposition between old time architecture and this new emerging food and beverage scene that's really, really vibrant. I absolutely love that. And the other piece that was really, I think, inspirational or like transformative in my career was the introduction to the student-run Harriet Watt Malt Whiskey Society. So this is run by kids who are largely in the bachelor's program, not the master's program, but the bachelor's of brewing and distilling science program. And you'd pay £5, so like $5 equivalently, right? Every other Friday. You'd roll into the cafeteria and they'd have 5 whiskeys ready to go. And so each one of these nights would be, hey, here's 5 Speyside whiskeys. So they're all like basically the same from the same region, right? But they're all finished in different casks. Or here's whiskey from the same region, but they're made using 5 different still types. Or, here are just things like that. And it was this really, really great way to get a kind of a targeted introduction to whiskey, we'll say, but Scotch malt whiskey in particular. And that just like it totally turned me on to whiskey. Distilled spirits, honestly, were not on my radar before that. And I just developed this really deep love of spirits at that moment, which was, that was pivotal in my decision to take the role at High West later on.
Interesting. Yeah. It's got to be cool to see, again, you're learning so much in classroom and experience there and all the way through your master's project, but then to have almost this like extracurricular activity where not only are you making friends with all these people, but it's like, all right, here are these 5 whiskeys, here's these 5 specific differences where you may have gone and being like, yeah, cool. Like I appreciate whiskey, but I don't really I came here for the beer. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're like, oh, I get something I didn't even know I didn't understand.
Absolutely.
And turns from this, not meh experience, but something you didn't hope to experience in that way to then impact so much of your career moving forward.
The other piece, I like your term extracurricular, but the other extracurricular that I really liked was I was the in-house brewer for a really small craft beer bar that had a half barrel brewing system like in the back corner. Cool. And so I would go do classes all day and then just immediately get a turnaround, go to work and try out, these different like hops that I'd been learning about or different, mashing procedures that I've been, learning about. And it made this I think this really impactful way of learning and doing that really helped shape my brewing education.
I think that's such a key part to it because I'm a firm believer that lessons have to be learned. They can't really be taught. Yeah. And so to the point that here's this classroom experience and then go and do, then it only solidifies it, makes you understand more. Cause so many people I know, went to school for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 years, whatever it might be. Then they get into the real world. They're like, oh wait, this is different than this perfect place where we learn in it's like theoretical ways. Totally. And so I'm glad that you had that experience to bridge that divide between them. And so you go to Edinburgh, you have this great experience. The lightning experience almost the distilling process outside of beer that you had this experience with at Red Rock. And in Kevin's words, you could take this anywhere. You could go to Singapore, you could go to New York, you could go to, insert any geography you want to. You go back to Utah. Was that always part of the plan? Did you feel more excited to go back after this, or what was your thoughts on returning to the home state?
My plan was to get a job at a really great brewery and learn something, learn that next phase of my brewing education, or get that next phase of my brewing education. And I think I got that with Uinta. My plan wasn't necessarily to come back to Utah. In the summer, my dad was diagnosed with a motor neuron disease, did like a degenerative motor neuron disease. And so that changed where I was looking to get employed. And so I knew Kevin Ely, who's the master brewer of Uinta at the time, from working on the Utah Brewers Guild. And he and I had been talking a little bit, and I, said how excited I was to come and work at Uinta, and everything absolutely worked out. And you think about these key mentors in your life. Kevin definitely was one of them. Kevin also was one of them.
Lots of Kevins.
Lots of Kevins, yeah. He went on later to start Woolly Pig Farm Brewery in Ohio. You should definitely check it out.
Okay.
But he set up this sort of new role for me at Uinta, where I spent 6 to 8 weeks in the lab, in the brew house, on the bottling line, in the cellar, and then kind of shadowing him to get this really well-rounded experience. So that was really, really powerful. And so I was their head brewer from like 2013-ish, 2014 to 2017 when I left to join High West, and ran their R&D program. So I was in charge of coming up with all the recipes for new beers. I think that in 2015, 2016 was like this time of crazy SKU proliferation at Uinta. And so I think we did something like 30 new beers in 15 months or something like that. But it was so creative, and I had a carte blanche. It was like completely blank check. And so, working on things like, I wrote the original recipe for Lime Pilsner or Los Angeles or, tangerine hopnosh, or, I had like this very distinct honor of coming up with these beers that were then on this national stage.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge, point of pride for me. And it was a big, important piece of my education.
And did you like that experience of going from, school education, which is so much different than like the practical part of things, and going to this place where you find yourself in this ambiguity where, like you said, carte blanche, the world is your oyster, or do you rather had a little bit more structure and be like, all right, iterate on these places. Here might be a couple places we want to expand. What was your thoughts going through that process?
I think that it was good for it definitely made me who I am now. I'll say that. So, I didn't have a whole lot of direction for like some of the administrative things, like, hey, when you add, 10 pounds of hops per barrel in this IPA, your cost is going to go way, way up. And here's our margin after that, right? Nobody was talking to me about that. And so that's maybe a good thing. For my career. Yeah, right. And so, I wasn't like really beholden to that. And so I could be endlessly creative, which I think was good. And so that sort of long leash allowed me to just play and iterate. And so that was really helpful for how I think about new product development now. I think, absolutely pie in the sky, like gold standard experience. I probably would have liked a little bit more background into that. And it's great to be creative. It's great to play. It's great to be iterative. But at the end of the day, we're running a business. And so when you make these decisions, like using huge amounts of hops per barrel, whatever, then it's going to impact your cost here. And here's what it's going to do to the business. That piece is something that I pay attention to a lot right now. And that didn't come really until I started at High West and I got more of the exposure into finance.
Got it. And so you're the head brewmaster at Uinta. And at what point did Brendan come back into the story, or how did that conversation get started that you ended up here in OneShip?
He approached me a couple of times actually. And it, never really was the right time. The first time was right before Kevin Ely was going to leave. And so I came to Kevin and I said, hey, I just got this interesting offer from High West. And he stood up, closed the door, came back and sat down and was like, you should know that I'm about to leave Uinta. And so I was like, oh my gosh. So him leaving, it opened up this space on our senior leadership team at Uinta. So I was able to attend, these meetings with the private equity, partners that Uinta had at the time, which was awful. And a big part of why I left. That was that ownership structure, private equity, it was really, really tough.
I've heard very few people that have said otherwise about similar situations.
Yeah, but a really important lesson for me.
Totally.
But so I stayed at that point, and then, it was a couple years later, 2017. I think that we spoke for like 6 months before I actually left. But he said, we've got a production manager position that's gonna open up here pretty soon, and I'd love for you to come and take the role. And at that point, all the stars sort of aligned, and I felt like I had sort of got the experiences that I wanted at Uinta, and my time there had run its course, and it was time to leave. So I said, let's do it. I joke that it was me saying, let's join the dark side, because I had never wanted to do I wouldn't say I never wanted to do it. Distilled spirits never really was on my career radar until I got the opportunity. And then it was like, all right, that's interesting. I can do that. And then, just have never looked back.
Awesome. And it's fun to see how, there's these similar faces throughout the story that come and go and come and go. And that, have helped you, not only just learn over there, but also have been such crucial parts of your career where if you didn't meet, Brendan back in the past before, then who knows what would have happened then. But then, you crush you into, you're cranking out all of these beers and this SKU proliferation. But then he's like, need you. And you're like, well, I did find that I do really like whiskey in Edinburgh. So let's make it happen.
Yeah. So, I joined in 2017 at High West, and we had just become part of the Constellation family. They've been really, really great partners since the acquisition in 2016.
And I'm actually curious about this because I was digging into it a little bit more, but I like that you have these two experiences. You have this experience at Uinta, private equity comes in, purchases, and then you have this experience where it's more, a strategic buyer, not necessarily 100% financially motivated, but with in Constellation. How would you talk about those two different experiences of having these two different entities in the room and how they played a role in you getting your job done?
That's a great question. I think that they were dramatically different. With the private equity company that had owned Uinta, they were most well-versed in software as a service. So there's like zero marginal cost for growing the business. And they thought, if we just hire more reps and just really, beat the ground, then we can grow Uinta from X to Y. And it just wasn't really the case. And so just for scale, I think at the time, the U.S. craft beer industry was growing between 6 and 10% a year, and Uinta was growing at 20% a year. But it never was enough. It never, hit the tech growth numbers. Yeah. And so that was pretty demoralizing. And so it was always,
it's like that parent that you'll never be good enough for.
100%. That's a great comparison. And so it never was about the craft, or it never was about how can we, realize wins and celebrate wins with the team. It was always what can we do to take 20% to 50%? And that was that's the name of the game with private equity. And that's a thing. But I think turning now to Constellation and the strategic partner, an industry member, it's very, very different. I think at the most broad level, they speak the same language as you, so they understand. They're paying attention to the industry. They understand that if the industry is growing at 6 to 10%, that growing at 50 or 75%, depending on where you are in your life cycle, of course, but maybe that's not super realistic for growth expectations. So that's really big. At the time, Constellation was really building their spirits portfolio, and so they saw High West's success, and they said, they've really got something special here. We're going to give them some sales and distribution muscle and get out of the way. And I really have felt that mentality has stuck around to date. I mean, they have been really, really supportive. They've obviously got big sales and distribution muscle, but they've really listened to us for how, as we've acquired new, craft spirits members, they've really listened to High West to how can we set ourselves up for success and put the whole spirits organization on track for success and growth in the future, long-term success, long-term growth, because with private equity, their event horizon was 3 years, or less than 5 years. But with Constellation, we're talking, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And so that's a really refreshing take is, we want to make the right decisions now so that in 2030, we're 4 times as big as we are, or, whatever. That's been really great.
No, I love that you say that, because I feel like there's so many people who, are entrepreneurs and business owners that get to a point, and we hear about it the most in tech, where it goes to becoming a venture-backed software startup. And talking with Blake and Scott, Blake Motorzycki and Scott Paul and Rochelle Morris and other people I've had on the podcast talk about it. And especially in the economic landscape we find ourselves in, that doesn't make sense for a lot of things. Not everything can grow at 100% year over year. And to have that other person now have a seat at the table, have control over you, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I've seen, friends start these businesses that honestly, it would be great just to have this company, the software that will do, $50,000 a month in your pocket, prints cash every day. You don't really have to work that every month. You don't really have to work that much. That's a great place to be. It doesn't need to go to 5 billion where you get your exit multiple, whatever that might be. And you could, again, go to private equity and they might write the biggest check, but they are going to be the biggest problem at the end of the day. Whereas when you have the right partner that, again, they're hey, we're going to get out of your way. We know you guys know how to make great whiskey. Yeah. There's no issues on that side. Let us CC you in some emails, get you introduced to the right people, and let's get this to where we need to. Because again, in coming from my finance background, and I would do investment banking, when any company is growing faster than the market is, you're taking market share. Yeah. And so to say, cool, the industry's growing at 5%, we're growing at 10%. Cool. Again, we don't need anything in the 3 to 5 year horizon we'd like it to be. And there's going to be metrics we need to get to those 15-year time horizons. But having that patience, having that understanding, that industry knowledge is huge, and only frees you up to do what you need to do instead of worrying about all the things you don't need to do.
Absolutely.
And so you land at High West, this whole different process, which thankfully you have this experience from Edinburgh that you fell in love with. Yep. You've been at Uinta, having a hell of a time with R&D and doing a lot of these new experiences there. What was that like? Did you love getting into whiskey? Was there a lot of a learning process outside of what you had learned, or? Yeah,
big learning curve for sure. So Harriet Watt is a wonderful brewing and distilling education program, full stop. However, it's not super hands-on. So I was very fortunate because I had worked at Red Rock, and I knew what chocolate malt tasted like. I knew what it looked like. I knew what lenticular filter was. Whereas a lot of my classmates didn't know what that was. They didn't have any real reference for what a lot of that was. And so I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to be in the brew house. The same thing goes for distilling, where I learned a huge amount of distilling theory, maturation chemistry theory, but I spent 2 days in a whole year in the still house. Wow. And that was it. So coming to High West, I had a huge amount of brew house experience and, sensory. And, at one point at Uinta, I was in charge of the lab. And so I had these pieces, but the actual hands-on practical distilling piece, I was lacking. And so that was probably the biggest learning curve, is what are the nuts and bolts of actually making spirit come off the still? And there's a learning curve, but like that's doable. And I think that if you have the background in the theory, then it like comes pretty quickly in like, oh, okay, so this is what that tastes like when your cut points are different, or like this is what they're talking about with separation and blah 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 blah. So that was a big thing. The other piece that was had a little bit of a learning curve with it was learning how to blend. Brendan is a really, really good whiskey blender. And he has taught me a huge amount about blending and how do you bolt on different whiskeys to create something with a lot of texture and dimension to it. Enter Tara Lindley, who she is currently our director of blend and sensory. And so she
what a job.
Yeah, I know. And she's also like a really tremendous blender. But she comes from the wine industry. I came from the beer industry. Brendan spent a huge amount of time in the spirits industry. So the three of us,
the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, we created the core sensory and blend team for High West until Brendan, has since rotated out of our direct team. But that was a big thing because, I had done lots of beer sensory, but it's at, 7% ABV or something. And so to come in and like go into to smelling whiskey at 46% ABV, it's just much different. And sometimes like really, aggressive at times, just like so much ethanol. That took a little bit of time getting used to. But it's all part of the growth process. And I had people like Brendan, Tara, along the way to get me up to speed really, really fast. So it's very lucky in that way.
And when you joined, did you have a vision of where you wanted to take, the portfolio of whiskeys for High West, or mostly just, along for the ride and see where it took you?
That my role was come along for the ride and we'll see where it goes. So, Brendan was master distiller.
Got it.
He was the shot caller for he had the deciding vote for all of our blends. And so we would get into, I'm looking at midwinters. That's a great example. So we would get into midwinters. We'd look at all the lots of ruby port finished barrels. We'd look at all the lots with tawny port finish. We'd blend them together. Tara and Brendan and I would all have our own sort of personal preference with, hey, I'd really like to put a little bit more tawny port influence into there to bring like some more kind of unctuous, dark, sticky fruit character. And then somebody else would be like, I'm really digging the bright, spicy notes that the ruby's bringing. So there's a little bit of horse trading, a little bit of push and pull in that process. And, Brendan would say, I think that it makes sense to do it this way because of XYZ. And so he was great at allowing us to voice our opinions and to come up with our own opinions. And then he would sort of provide this guiding force to get us on the right track.
Yeah.
So that was, it was great.
And that's like such a nice, leader and mentor to have in that process. Cause it's one thing for him to come and be like, I have the vote. This is my vote. I don't really care what you people say. Have a good one.
Blending with an iron fist.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And so in the less communist way of doing it, even if he just like, listen, internally he might say, this is how we're doing it. I know best. But to be like, and here's how I got here, to make it an educational experience for both you and Tara. Because again, you're coming from beer. She's coming from wine. You guys both have the background and the nose and the knowledge to do it. But to have someone guide you in a way to be like, here's how I got there. Yeah. Because again, at some point in this process, he's planning his exit to go right off into the sunset and come wherever he needs to help and still have some sort of hand in the pot. But to make sure that it's off in the right hands instead of having this iron fist and then let go of the iron fist and see where that goes, to really be kind of like a teacher in the process.
Absolutely. I think that, when you think about building the most high performance team like that, if you have people on the team that have some potential to grow and to be really, really competent in XYZ, whatever it is, if you can sort of foster that growth, your team just becomes that much stronger, because now each one of those people are thinking about the process a little bit differently. They're bringing their own opinions that are rooted in good, like, sound technical backing, or like, in experiential backing. I think that together you're just are so much stronger. And so Tara and I still work in lockstep now, and our roles have expanded to include all of Constellation Spirits. And so as we're, looking at blending tequila for Casa Noble, or, working on the Nelson's Greenbrier portfolio, or still, a huge amount of time is spent on High West, we're able to take all of that experience, from, our time at High West, and now apply it in a little bit different way. But she and I have tasted together for so long that I know what she's thinking before she says it. And I'm sure she feels the same way, but we can totally play off of each other and be like, oh, you know what this batch of Campfire needs? You remember in 2019 when we did XYZ? That's what we should do again. And so, it's been great to have her, and I be able to work so closely, and to be able to speak the same language. And that development back in the day with Brendan, I think, was so influential.
Totally. And so walk me through that process of going from, so you go from like beer to like, okay, I can figure out whiskey. Like, I don't have a ton of hands-on, but I at least in theory know it, to then being like, hey, we want you to be now the director of distilling for all of these spirits. I mean, how was that? I mean, scope expansion, responsibility change in your career? It's
been great. Honestly, Brendan was great about, working with me to, on the blending side of things. I've always had a knack for like process design, I think. And so, as we've bolted on new craft spirits members, there was always an element of him pushing me to say, what do we need to do at that site to get them to max capacity at site? Like, how much, what do we need to invest in order to get them to be able to produce as much whiskey on site as they can? And so thinking about process in that way was really helpful. And, but then again, like having that mentor all along the way to be like, oh, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I wouldn't have done it that way. Here's how I would have done it. Really helped me, to shape how I think about whiskey distilling process, blending process, things like that. And so just, project after project, and being involved with blending, and, coming up with my own opinions on how some of these blends should come together, how they should taste. It sort of was inevitable, I think. He has started Dendrick Estates, which is a estate style cidery in Camas Valley. And they'll open up their tasting room, I think, next summer. But at some point he was ready to transition out and sort of hand over the reins. And so he started stepping back in some of those blending conversations, or in some of those investment conversations, and letting Tara and I really take front and center stage. And so when it was time for him to exit, we had sort of already stepped into those roles in some ways. And so it was, it's been different having all of the responsibility, I think. Yeah. But the skill set's there, and it's learning how to manage your time a little bit differently across a portfolio rather than across just High West. But I have loved every minute of working at High West, and now, this new role has been really engaging.
Oh, that's awesome to see how far it's come from realizing you don't want to go to med school to now, having all of these experiences and growing so much and learning so much, not just in, the creation process, but to your point, like you're like, oh, when I was at Uinta, I had this experience of, make whatever you want to, financials you're not directly responsible for yet. Right. And then you get this experience, where you are, and you get, a sight into the financial metrics and how the business is run. And then you come here and see that to another extent, but then also see like, oh, well, look at this portfolio of brands and say, how do we think about adding a new brand to our portfolio, and why would we choose this tequila distillery compared to this one?
Yeah. Like, what's the network utilization that, you can achieve with that merger and acquisition target, right? Like, that's been really interesting.
Totally. And it's stressful because they're like, should we invest X million dollars into this? We need your opinion. You're like, I thought it was good. But then having that experience of things and then all the way through where they come to you and be like, all right, well, how do we utilize all of this? What is our max capacity? Which correlates to how much can we do in the next, 3, 5, 10 years at current capacity? How much do we invest to get to next tier of capacity so that we can keep growing? Any business wants to, not at like the tech multiple sort of growth, but something reasonable and get to do that. So that's, amazing. And so thinking about, your career now with High West and Constellation, what have been some of your favorites, labels or bottles that you've done over the years?
That's like, I knew you were going to ask that question. It's like choosing your favorite child. Let's take a look over here at the wall. So some of the most recent ones we've come out with, we talked about Bottled and Bond. That is really near and dear to my heart and our team's heart, because that's our own spirit. So Bottled and Bond is a designation that comes from the government. So it has to adhere to a set of really, really strict rules. And it came about like so it's the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897. The government was going to put some regulations around whiskey because people were putting like turpentine and tobacco spit and all kinds of nasty stuff in their whiskey that were making people sick or killing them, or just making their whiskey, gross, we'll say. And so Bottled and Bond has to be aged at least 4 years. It can't have anything in it except for water. So you can't add artificial coloring, which nothing at High West does, but just another fact. It has to be bottled at 100 proof. And then the thing that I love about it so much is that all the spirit has to come from within one production year. And then apart from that, or I guess in addition to that, it has to come from within 1 6-month distilling season. So January through June, July through December. And so I'm honestly not sure where that came from, but it creates this really fun, challenging box to blend within, because, take Rendezvous Rye, for example. Rendezvous is a blend of 6-year column still rye with our 4 to 9 year old High West pot still rye blended in. And so so that's kind of like the two big chunks. However, we blend rye whiskey that's as old as like 12 years old, and to give it a little bit of depth. And so those are some of the tricks that you can do to give a core product like that, like continuity and consistency over the time. Like you can vary the 12-year-old, you can vary the 6-year-old, you can vary the pot still, because each one of those pieces is this like living, breathing organism. So you have to be a little bit dynamic. But with Bottled and Bond, you get 1 6-month window to work within. And so if, somebody was running the still a little bit weird, or, there's just nothing to hide behind. And so it really is a feather in the distiller's cap, I think, to come out with a product like that is well balanced, that's delicious, and it's something that I'm really proud of. I think another one to talk about is Boo Rye. Boo Rye is one of my absolute favorites. It comes out in the spring every year. It's kind of our celebration of old chewy whiskeys. So it's a blend of bourbon and rye, Boo Rye. And everything in the blend is at least 10 years old. So typically it's a big, chewy, beautiful bourbon base. Yeah. And then we add in some older ryes, call it like, between 12 and, 14 years sometimes. We added some older rye in for spice. And so again, by varying the levels of each one of those components in that blend, we can retain the same soul of the whiskey, but with each iteration, with each year, we're able to bring a little bit of personality into the mix. Same thing with Bottled and Bond. The iteration that we're on right now that you can get at the bottle shop is from fall of 2018. Okay. But next year we'll do whiskey from 2020. And then the year after, it might be, 2019 or 2021. And so it's sort of like the spirits version of the wine vintage, where we want to create a big, bold, impactful pot still whiskey that's Bottled and Bond, but we like to celebrate those little vintages and the little personalities along the way.
That's one thing I love too. Going back to my cousin in Portland, like it was fun because I went by, because I used to go every other year. It's been like 2 years since I've gone now, but I would know after so many tours, be like, oh yeah, 2016 was a wet year, 2017 was a dry year, and like understand how that correlates to flavor.
Yeah.
And in the same way, because you can't hide behind anything with the bottled and bond, it's like, yeah, you're gonna feel a lot of that because it is so pure and so specific.
Even like things, we will see a shift in our bottled and bond in like with the next iteration, because in 2018 we had a big expansion project. We put on some new bells and whistles on the still that made it function a little bit differently. And so pre-2018, or we'll say pre-2019, we didn't have quite as good of control with separation. We made beautiful whiskey. It just comes across as has a really distinct cereal note, and it's bigger, it's badder, and then after 2019, we add what's called a defumator onto the still, where we're able to control the separation, to purify the spirit a little bit more. And so we've seen whiskey that's like really spicy and like has a little bit more focus to it. The cereal character is dialed back a little bit, but it's those things where you're really able to track down to the date. Oh, this is definitely pre 2019 High West. Oh, this is definitely post 2019 High West. I really like those little hidden stories behind all the products.
Yeah, no, that's so fun. And thinking about, the future for, High West specifically, but also Constellation, what does that look like for, consumers?
I think, High West MO has always been blending, and that's not going to change. We will always go out into the market and source whiskeys that are beautiful, that are distinct, that will create those fun accents on our blends or create a really impactful base to blend on top of. We now have a lot of distilling capacity at our sites, and we now have some of our own whiskey inventory that's coming of age. And so I think that I know that you'll start to see more High West products or more High West whiskey coming into the products, like bottled and bond, like High West bourbon coming into the High West bourbon blend, things like that. And so we're now just on the precipice of this next phase of High West, where for so long the focus was exclusively on source blends. And now we've got a lot of levers to play with. And so it will still be blended. It'll still be a good chunk of source whiskey, but we'll be able to create and feature and celebrate some of those custom mash bills that we've made ourselves that help to fill some of those holes that flavor holes in our inventory that we couldn't source, and help to add some of those impactful accents on the blend. So I can't say any more than that. Yeah. I'm so excited for what we've got in the hopper, but absolutely stay tuned.
No, I'm excited because I always love whenever I go out or go to a liquor store and I'm like, well, this is new, or I haven't seen this one before.
Yeah.
And so I know there's only going to be more fun surprises and excitement to come. Well, Isaac, I want to end with the two questions I always ask every guest at the end of every episode. One, if you could have someone on the Small Lake City podcast and hear more about what they're up to, who would you want to hear from?
Oh, that's a great question. How about, have you interviewed Matt Caputo?
No, I'm actually, that's funny you mentioned that. I'm actually texting and emailing and Instagram DMing him about it, because the Caputo sandwich is one of my favorite sandwiches
it's iconic. That's a Salt Lake staple, I think. Yeah.
I used to live a half mile away from 15th and 15th.
Awesome.
And so that would be like my midday break. Like, I need to walk somewhere. I'd be like, well, I could use a sandwich. And so I'd go get a sandwich and come back. And then now I live in Marmalade District, so close to the one downtown. So now I'd be like, I need a coffee? Well, we could probably get a sandwich too. I do want to sit down with Matt because I'm curious enough about the story and love their product and everything that they still do with all their classes and tastings and do so much for the community. So I think Matt would be a great person to have. And then secondly, if people want to find out more about, High West, a way to keep up with any of the new whiskeys coming out, or the best way to find more information. Yeah, absolutely. Check out highwest.com, Instagram, Drink High West, and Isaac Winter at Isaac Winter. So
I think those are the best ways.
Deal. Will do. Well, Isaac, thank you so much. It's been so fun to learn more about the High West. Everybody go buy a bottle, come up to the One Ship Distillery and have brunch. It's one of my favorite places to get away from the city. Lots of great things to come. I'm excited to see it.
Thanks so much.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Salt Lake City Podcast. Don't forget to like, follow, review, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. And we'll catch you next week. We'll see you there.